Hello, welcome to a bonus Books Boys episode. I'm Dean and I'm joined by the author Tom Weaver, and we're here to talk about his amazing book, Artificial Wisdom. Tom, hello.
Hello, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the show. And thank
You're
you
very welcome.
for the book. We've got a nice copy here. I've read it and I absolutely love it. But I want to ask you before I talk about the plot or anything like that, the book comes with a few little inserts, little kind of gifts. Do you want to tell us
Hmm.
about that?
Yeah, this is something special we've been doing for some of the advanced readers. We wanted to create something that was an experience that kind of went beyond the book. So we went through and we found things within the book that could maybe be tied into little goodies. For example, one of the characters drinks a lot of coffee, so we put in a very nice organic, eco-friendly coffee bag for our readers to enjoy. Similarly, we link to some digital content that isn't in the book because
Hmm.
I have this kind of idea that really, books should exist beyond the pages. There should
Yeah.
be this sense that there is this world outside of them, and we've been slowly creating, a little podcast episode with the protagonist set, 30 years from now, for example, and some other bits and pieces, just trying to make it flow off the page
Hmm.
and give people that enjoy the book the chance to go and discover a little bit more.
Yeah. It's good to because the book itself is very good with world building anyway, and you create this nice experience, but then when you add in these little extra things, it just makes it all feel bigger, like there's more going on. It's not just, okay, I read these few pages and I'm done. And I think that's really good. There is a little piece of chocolate in there, and I've been kind of telling myself, do not eat the chocolate until you do the interview. So now I can eat the chocolate.
I think that the chocolate's actually been the more controversial one as far as I've seen it. Like
Oh,
it's vegan chocolate. And I've seen some people refer to it as interesting, which my wife would usually use as code for uh
not
didn't
great.
like that very much. But I've also seen somebody say that this morning it was fantastic. So who
Okay.
knows? You'll have to let us know.
I will. I'll be trying it as soon as we finish the recording, probably when I get my cup of tea later. Well, look, thanks so much for joining us. How long did it take you to write this book? It feels like it's not just you sat down and wrote whatever came out. There's a lot of ideas would have had to be constructed, I guess, to build this world.
Yeah, I think alongside many new debut writers, I started writing in 2020. I
Yeah.
was in the fortunate position of actually having sold my tech startup kind of just before the pandemic and managed to essentially exit. So I did actually have some time to myself, time to think. One of the things I discovered almost immediately was that when you suddenly have time to think, your brain goes kind of bonkers with all these worries that you've actually got time to delve into now. And in a way, writing this was my therapy. So I started it in 2020. I probably had a finished draft maybe by 2022, mid 2022. And then it's amazing just how much tweaking and refinement goes
Mm.
on even after that point, right up to literally the going to print. We'd gone to the audiobook narrator, and the narrator had recorded an incredible audiobook, but had come up with some suggested changes during that process, and we
Oh,
were able to tie them in just before it went to print. But it's literally tweaking commas and even one word in the opening paragraph changed, right up to the last minute.
yeah.
So these things take time.
Sure, of course, of course. Um, Tell me about the title, Artificial Wisdom. So, I mean, what we have in the book, and I guess we're living in a future, and of course, we have an AI, essentially an Artilect, Solomon,
Mm.
who is one of the candidates to be dictator. And the title gets explained a little bit as the book goes on, because I guess it's the difference between intelligence and wisdom, right? Would you say
Mm.
that? I mean, obviously, you've chosen the title very carefully. How did that kind of come about?
I think I knew very, very early on that, obviously I wanted to write about artificial intelligence in a different way. I didn't want to write the Terminator. It's already been done.
Yeah.
There's millions of stories of bad AI. And I had this idea that actually, if we are trying to solve some of the biggest crises out there of humanity today, of which the biggest is climate change, AI is going to be a very powerful tool to do that. But our worries about AI are that it will supplant us as human beings, that essentially it would do exactly what we would do if we suddenly found ourselves at the top of any food chain, which is we would stamp out everything beneath it. And yet, if we were actually to put AI in charge of trying to save us in some way, which is
Mm,
essentially one of these ideas that I explore in the novel, we would need to make sure it is fundamentally people centered, which is why I came up with the idea that the AI is called Solomon. Obviously, that relates back to King Solomon, the wisdom of Solomon, and his very famous story about that, that I won't bother repeating here. Everybody probably knows it, but this idea that actually he wasn't just a smart guy, he was a wise guy. And what did
hmm
that mean? It meant he was able to make decisions which were about humanity and
mm,
our humanity at the center of it. And I kind of feel like if we are to use AI as a tool in our future, we're going to need a touch of that as well. We're going to
yeah.
need it to understand a little bit more about who we are, and it can't be a cold thing. It has to be a people-centered thing.
Yeah. It's interesting as well because I guess the campaign of Lockwood, his rival for the dictatorship, wants to say really only a human can solve a human problem. And when I kind of thought about the difference between intelligence and wisdom, and I kind of thought, intelligence is something that you can study, you can learn, you can read a book, but wisdom is more you have to have lived experience. And I guess that's kind of the argument that Lockwood's camp would make, something like, well, we're actually human, we understand the issues more. But Solomon's not a very simple being, and he's been programmed by Martha to be really quite sophisticated and quite complex and even to feel emotion. And I suppose once he's able to do that, then you can argue that he actually is capable of wisdom and not just learning. And I think that's very important.
Yeah, it's I mean you can make arguments for both sides, and that was actually, of course, very deliberate. I actually
Yes.
want people to be to actually get to the end and have a big argument over this as to what they think is who would actually be the right course for us. Are we destined to put our future in AI's hands because it will do the job better, or are we better to stay sure and as some would put it, and make sure that we're only ever governed by the humans. So yeah, I think for me to make Solomon wise required this idea of emotions because you
Mm.
have to experience emotions to understand humanity.
The funny thing is, I'm a big technophobe. So when I started reading the book, initially I'm like, oh, it's a futuristic dystopia. It's terrible. But then as I'm reading on, I'm like, oh, it's not really. I mean, there's like, oh, the climate disaster and everything, sure. But I'm like, oh, they can fix this. It's not, this isn't a in 1984 or something. This isn't necessarily a dystopia. This can be a good place to live if they can get good leadership and fix the problems. And then I'm thinking about it more and more, and I'm thinking, could Solomon do a better job than a human dictator or even just in any government? And it's easy to say, no, we shouldn't let the machines do it. And so, well, we've had, many thousands of years of human history, and I don't think humans have done a good job up until now. So maybe let the AI try.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I've definitely had some people come down very clearly on the side of Solomon, saying, like we fundamentally get this. Like, I think there's so much happening in our world right now and today that is scary, and sometimes you kind of look at all the problems out there and think, how in the midst of all of the big challenges that we have, are we facing, war on one hand, human instigated fights over territory, which, you would think just wouldn't be a 21st century issue, and denial of the big issues. I mean, how do you even begin to cope with that? So much of our issues kind of come back to our flawed nature as human beings and the fact that we can't really figure all this out together. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I've definitely seen some people come down on the side of saying, what, let's give something else a try.
Yeah, I mean, humans are very flawed. We're just animals at the end of the day. So I think people have very high expectations for us, and we consistently let ourselves down. And I'm like, yeah, that that is exactly what I would expect us to do. So yeah, give something else a try. What do
Yeah.
you so there's also an element of the book that's kind of I don't want to give away too many, plot points, but I guess we can say that Martha, the creator of Solomon, is killed, and I'll probably not go beyond that point in terms of the plot of the book.
Hmm.
But that kind of creates essentially a murder mystery vibe. There's a detective vibe. There's like an almost Agatha Christie closed room vibe because we know it had to be one of the people at the party who did it. So then you get this kind of like, okay, this whodunit thing going in. Is that was like that something that you wanted to do? Did you want to like write a whodunit at some point and you combined it in, or did the story just took you that way?
I would definitely say I wanted to write a whodunit.
Mm.
And in fact, I've been reading a load of Agatha Christie kind of before even starting this, and thinking just how wonderful those stories
Mm.
are. And when I read an Agatha Christie, I sit there with a notebook and I try and figure out
Yeah.
who it is, and then I'm always surprised at the end. And I very much wanted to create that experience, but it occurred to me um, that when you get into the future, it's so hard to create a locked room or a closed door mystery or any of these kind of things
Mm.
because technology fundamentally gets in the way. They often say that a lot of the great kind of murder mystery books are set before mobile phones because mobile
Yeah.
phones kind of get in the way of trying to solve some of these things. So I was intrigued by the challenge of trying to set something in a
Mm.
world that was even more tech heavy than we have now. Um, and I would say I kind of had these two starting points of I wanted to tell a story about what would happen if the world was splitting apart in Brexit style polarization, and what would happen
Yeah.
if, in that scenario, how do we solve the climate? But I was also really intrigued by this idea of a murder mystery. So I did see it as a little bit of an onion, that there was a murder mystery at the core, but the broader tech thriller around the outside. And I think a model for that, one of the greatest books that does this is The Gold Dragon Tattoo.
Mm.
Gold Dragon Tattoo is fundamentally a murder mystery, and it's trying to solve what is it, a 40-year-old crime. And around that there is this idea of a thriller. The people, being in jeopardy and dealing with the issues that crop up in the course of trying to solve that. So that was definitely an inspiration point for me. I mean, I couldn't do anything similar to what he was doing there, and it wouldn't fit my
Mm.
kind of story anyway. But this idea of a murder mystery buried within a thriller, I think, was established by Dragon Tattoo first.
Nice. And it's done very well here because I mean I'm a big Agatha Christie fan. I think I've got 70 Agatha Christie books on my shelf. There's a few
Wow.
missing. She wrote 80 or something, so there's a few missing, but I've got almost all of them. And I never predict who it is either. But this didn't.
So I have to ask then. Did you actually figure out this one out?
I thought I did, but then no, because without giving anything away, there are twists at the end. So initially, I'm thinking, okay, it's Lockwood, he's the bad guy. That I'm thinking, is it possible that it's Solomon and it's all been a ruse? But then there's like kind of intrigue and ruse on top of intrigue and ruse at the end, and then I didn't know where it was going.
Yeah.
So I think I got 1 or 2 points, but I didn't get the whole thing,
Good. As a
which is
if I
good.
if I've managed to sneak one past an Agatha Christie aficionado, then I've done my
Yeah.
job.
What do you think about this idea of so they're electing the dictator, and the first thing I noticed when I pick up the book is I've got a bookmark that says Solomon for dictator, and I misread
Yeah.
it at first. I assumed it said
Yeah.
Solomon for president, and my brain just kind of tricked me, and I looked at it again. I was like, hold on, that says dictator. I was like, okay, this is not what I thought.
Mhm.
And it's based on obviously this Roman idea of like electing one person to just solve the problems. I mean, I studied Roman history in university, so I know that that's realistic to the point where it happened. But how realistic do you think it is that that could happen again? Like the premise of the book is essentially we need a global dictator to just, cut the red tape, cut the bureaucracy, cut the communication issues, and just get down to it and fix things. Do you think that could or would happen?
So I think that the job of every author is almost to tell people the future that could happen if they don't sort stuff out now, right? It's always to paint like scenarios of,
Yeah.
look, if you don't deal with this, this is what's going to happen. Um, I think the Roman dictatorship was a really interesting idea, and obviously the word itself has warped and changed, and is
Mm.
now a very negative word, and we had a lot of toing and froing with different editors over the word dictator and
Mm.
whether it should even be called a dictator because of the negative connotation. But
Yeah.
I do think it expressed in the Roman sense exactly this idea, as you say, um, of of being given power, of solving a crisis, and then what you're meant to do is hand power back. But I also like that again with the Romans. This happened. You had multiple dictators who did this until you had the one that didn't. Um, and then and even the one before that, so obviously Caesar
Yeah.
didn't hand back power, but even Sulla, he handed back power, but he did it after an incredible bloodbath where he wiped out pretty much anybody that he viewed as on the other side. So I think if we're in that situation, we have to face up to the fact that we don't know what kind of dictator we would get.
Mm.
Like we might get a dictator who solves the crisis and hands power back. We might get a dictator who doesn't. I don't think we really want to be there, but I do think that we ultimately are on a course where this problem, the climate, which is an incredibly complex, connected crisis, it can't be solved by one country or
Yeah.
one corporation or one thing, and so you're going to have these forces that are working against each other and ultimately not making the hard decisions because it's impossible
Yeah.
to when you've got to have an election in a few years' time. And if we continue on the course we're on, we're going to have to make some decisions which are going to be terrible, and we might not be able to make them. I think that's the point I was trying to get through.
Yeah.
Unless
Yeah.
you did elect somebody who just had a mandate, and it wasn't about being elected again; it was about solving the crisis. And I genuinely think that I mean, God knows what. I can't see ourselves ever getting in a position where we would do it, but I think it might be the only actual course of action at some point.
Yeah, we could at least come to a time where it's the only way to fix things. Whether we take that option or not, I suppose we'll wait and see.
Yeah.
And essentially, there is this climate crisis, and that's what they have to deal with. Um, there's also so essentially we've got our chap Tully, who's a reporter, a journalist, and he hears from very adequately named character Whistle, who's a kind of whistleblower, telling him, well, we've got this information, and you're a person who could write a story about it, but lures him in with this idea that I've also got some information about this climate catastrophe that happened, and your wife dies in that catastrophe. So I let it slip by me, but I should have maybe been a little bit more careful to realize Tully could be played, because obviously you've gone straight for the heartstrings there by saying we might be able to help you with figure out who killed your wife or who was responsible for the disaster that killed your wife. And maybe he's more easily manipulated than I at first thought, because I'm thinking, well, he's pursuing the story. That's what a journalist should do. So we'll just let that go. But he travels to New Carthage. He meets Commander October, and off they go trying to solve the crime. The New Carthage stuff is very interesting, though. These floating cities. I think there's more. New Carthage, Troy, Babylon, I think was another. Are you just an ancient history fan, or what was the naming reasons for those?
Yeah, well, so six ancient cities which no longer exist, and this idea of New Carthage, New Troy, multiple city states, this idea of floating cities, which ultimately I think again we may find ourselves doing. I've seen some wonderful ideas around it over the years, but
Hmm.
I think I deliberately tried to create a setting here which was interesting and controversial. This idea that actually we might have these incredible havens from the bad weather out there, but it might only be open to those who can afford to live there. Um, and so that was something I really wanted to explore and figure out. But I'd had this idea of this floating city in my head for a good 20 years,
Right.
trying to figure out how I was going to use it in a story at some
Hmm.
stage or another. And it just, it was just one of those things when I was trying to write the book, I was like, okay, I'm gonna use
Yeah,
that one.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it fits beautifully. I almost think the book would be strange without it. I mean, I suppose you could put it somewhere else, but it fits really nicely. And of course, the rules are slightly different there, and some of the policing procedures and things aren't necessarily what Tully's used to. And they've already got Solomon as the leader there in New Carthage, so they've tried
Mhm.
having him as a governor, and now we want to see can we have him replicate that on a global scale, basically. But it's kind of tried and true that he's doing the job already as a governor, and
Yeah.
that's an because it would be harder to justify if he'd never done it before.
Yeah, I had a very much a model in my head of kind of Singapore here.
Mm.
I think Singapore, if you look at it on any chart, is at the top and to the right. It is wealthy, it is successful, it is safe, but it is essentially I'll say dictatorship very carefully here in a very positive way.
Mm,
But it is, there is no real opposition to the government in power. And most people that are there don't want there really to be
mm,
anybody else because the people in power are doing a fantastic job. So I had that idea, which is why some of the laws in New Carthage are quite strict, because
yeah.
I figure you would do you've got essentially an authoritarian, like you want to come and live here, sure, but it's our rules, or you go somewhere else. So if you've got that choice, you probably do put things in place that aren't dependent on um, democracy in the same way that we are dependent on democracy. Um, so yeah, that was the sort of genesis behind that, and then yes, having Solomon as an existing governor, not really elected, he was fundamentally put in place there by the people that create these floating states, and then is nominated for the dictatorship really as a joke, as a joke candidate, and ends
Mm.
up being in the top two.
Yeah. And the other last thing I wanted to mention was the way you weave technology into the investigation, because they're okay, we need to review some information, and they're using this kind of neuro reality in this headspace and this kind of stuff. They're putting this helmet on, or whatever it is, and they're able to see things happening. And it's kind of taking all the social media and everything that we have now just into like what it probably is a realistic next sphere for it, I guess. But it was nice to see how that plays out and how it was useful to them.
Yeah, I'm a tech guy at heart. I love technology. I'm a tech optimist, I think it's probably fair to
Mm,
say, although I also recognize that every technology we've ever had comes at some sort of cost to us.
yeah,
Mobile phones have connected us in a way that we've never been able to access before, and has stolen our attention at the same time. So I was very interested to explore what technology in 30 years would look like. But I didn't want to be faced with a Back to the Future 2-esque scenario of flying cars,
yeah.
when we reached 2050, going, well, none of this kind of came true. I wanted to very much look at what technology can I actually see on the horizon today, and think about where it might end up in 20 to 30 years time.
Yeah.
And so, yes, there is these evolutions of things like virtual reality. I've got, a neuro reality. So you're essentially experiencing a full sensory environment within your head, rather
Mm,
than just having it cast into your eyes and your ears. But I also have the next version of augmented reality, i.e., what Apple is bringing out now, and the next version of what you might say like the Nest security cam system. What does that look
mhm.
like in 30 years time? How do you review security footage in
That
30
stuff
years? It was
terrifies
the
me.
small stuff. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's invasive, but it always has been. I remember I did computer science at university
Mm,
back in 1999 when I was going to university, reading a book about privacy, and the argument was, today we walk down a street in 1999, and you walking down that street are seen by 400 security cameras, and this is all going to change. We're going to actually want privacy, and it's all going to be about privacy in the next 20 years. And as it happened, we went the opposite way, and we actually decided to trade up pretty much all of our privacy in return for products and things to learn about us and sell us advertisements. So I think there's some fundamentals there about that. We're already on a path, and what does that look like when you continue going down that path?
yeah. And I think that side of things is definitely, very realistic. So I'll let you go. First of all, would you like to just plug your website or tell people where they can get the book?
Sure. My website is thomasrweaver.com. If you go on there, you can see a little bit about the book, but also see some of the extended world content. And you can buy the book at your favorite bookstore: Amazon, Waterstones, Apple, Google, your choice. Oh,
Fantastic.
I have to say the audio book is wonderfully narrated by Stephen Pacey, who is one of the most incredible narrators in the world. He's the guy that did the first Law series, Joe Abercrombie's stuff,
Right.
and it's just unbelievable. It's just blown me away by it. So if you're into audiobooks, I really recommend you check that out, because he's just done the most incredible job I've ever heard.
Fantastic. Well, there we go. I will close with the final question that we ask every author who calls in. If there's any existing book that you wish you'd been the person to write, what would it be?
Oh wow, it's a huge question, but the first one that comes to mind is Ender's Game and Ender's Shadow, the kind of parallel novel to Ender's Game by
Mhm.
Orson Scott Card. I've probably read that book and recommended that book more times than I dare count. And what I particularly love about these two books, apart from the future that Orson Scott Card creates, is really these competitions in the battle school, this
Mm.
floating battle station that these child soldiers are taken up to. And you know, whilst everything around that is fantastic, everything else that happens is also fantastic. The games that they have to play against each other and that sense of competition and a kid becoming a winner, I just think is an eternal theme, and it's just wonderful to see how it plays out. And particularly with the parallel novel Ender's Shadow, um, again, I'm a Back to the Future fan as well, so I always like this idea of seeing kind of like as if it's not time travel in this book, but
Mm.
you know that there's actually this interplay between what you can see in another story happening that you can't see, and then in a later book or film that you do see that story. So I love the way that he created this parallel story that complemented Ender's Game and gave it depth so that you could
Mhm.
reread it again and think about all the things that you know are now happening, but you're not seeing on that page.
Yeah, that's a really cool way to do it. Have extra information kind of coming at you later. Well, Tom, thank you so much for calling in. Um,
Thank you.
and thank you for the book. It was fantastic. So I
Thank you for
absolutely
reading.
love it. I'll be recommending it to everyone.
That's what I like to hear.
Have a great day.
Thank you.